All right, let's get into a really wild business story today, one that comes from a 2003 case study. We're going to look at this strange, kind of powerful paradox that the entire nuclear industry was facing. And trust me, what it teaches us about survival, about a company's hidden superpowers, it's pretty fascinating. So let's start with the central puzzle here. I want you to imagine you're running a company that builds nuclear power plants. You have this technology with just incredible potential, right? I mean, clean energy for the whole planet. But, and it's a huge but, nobody's buying. Nobody wants a new plant. So how on earth does an entire industry with all that promise end up staring into the abyss? You see, back in the early 2000s, these companies were living in two different worlds at the same time. In one world, you had the promise, this amazingly powerful source of clean energy, and even other game-changing applications like turning saltwater fresh on a massive scale. But in the real world, the reality was brutal. Demand was in a nosedive, and there was this huge political and public backlash. It just didn't add up. So let's really dig into what the source material here calls the nuclear paradox, because this wasn't your average everyday business downturn. No, this was a much weirder and way more complex strategic puzzle. Now, if you were just looking at the technology, at the charts, everything seemed to be following this classic pattern called the S-curve. You have this rapid growth and improvement back in the 60s and 70s, but then things start to level off. The power output of reactors, the efficiency gains, they all started to flatten out. So from a technical point of view, it looked like a mature technology, maybe even one on its way out. But here's the thing, and this is the twist in the whole story. The reason for that slowdown, it wasn't because the engineers hit a wall or ran out of good ideas. Nope. The real story, the thing that bent that curve, had nothing to do with technology. It was all about politics. I mean, think about it. After huge accidents like 3 Mile Island and especially Chernobyl, the whole game changed. The political landscape just completely shifted. Countries started hitting the brakes hard, putting flat-out bans on building new plants. Public pressure was intense. Safety rules were always changing, which made everything more expensive and way more unpredictable. It was all these outside forces, not some technical limit, that were basically choking the industry. And this brings us to the absolute core argument of the research. For these nuclear companies, the biggest threat wasn't just losing money on projects that got canceled. The risk they were facing was much, much deeper than that. This quote from Prahalad and Hamel just nails it. Think about it. A physical factory, a machine, if you don't use it, yeah, it might rust. But a skill, a competence, something a whole team of people knows how to do, that doesn't just rust, it vanishes. Knowledge, expertise, that stuff actually gets better the more you use it. So, without any new projects, these companies were in danger of losing the very thing that made them special. To really get this, we've got to shift our perspective a little. There's a way of thinking in business strategy called the resource-based view, and it basically says, hey, a company isn't just a list of the products it sells. It's not a portfolio of nuclear plants. A company is actually a unique bundle of skills and capabilities. It's defined by what it knows how to do. And protecting those abilities, well, that's the real key to surviving in the long run. So what were these special skills? What were these capabilities? Well, the analysis boils it down to 3 core superpowers that these companies had spent decades and billions of dollars building up. Okay, so first, you've got the pure, deep scientific knowledge of nuclear physics. I mean, very few people on Earth know how to do this stuff. Second, they were absolute masters of risk management. Their safety rules, their testing, it was second to none, for obvious reasons. And third, and this is the one that's so important for our story, they had mastered massive, almost mind-bogglingly complex project management. Now, it's one thing to say massive project management, but it's another to really feel what that means. So let's just run through a couple of numbers real quick to put this into perspective. First, the timeline. We're talking about an average of 7 years to build a single power plant. 7 years of keeping a project of that scale on track. Next, the people. At the peak of construction, you could have 5,500 people working on one single site. Just try to imagine the logistics of managing all of that. And finally, get this. To build just one of the later French power stations took a staggering 17 million man-hours. That's not just a skill. That's an organizational work of art. And it was the one superpower that was most in danger of just disappearing. So this brings us to the big strategic question. You've got this incredibly valuable, complex skill, this organizational muscle,
and it's starting to atrophy because you're not using it. They needed a plan. They had to find a way to exercise that project management muscle, or it was going to be gone for good. So if you're a manager sitting in one of those companies, what's your play? What do you do? How in the world do you keep these amazing, hard-won skills alive when your main market has just evaporated? Well, they had a few options. They could scrap and claw for the very few international projects left. They could shift over to related things, like maintaining existing plants. But the paper points to a much more brilliant solution. Go find a totally different market that needs the exact same set of core skills. And what was the perfect fit? Building huge, large-scale water desalination plants. Now, why was this so perfect? Because building a giant desalination plant was basically the ideal gym for their most vulnerable superpower. It was the perfect workout. It required that same mastery of coordinating massive, complex, multi-year construction projects with incredibly high safety and technical demands. So this wasn't just about chasing new money. It was a strategic move to save their most precious skill. And that all brings us to the final takeaway here, the big, timeless business lesson that we can all learn from this very specific story from the nuclear industry.
Here it is, plain and simple.
So I'll leave you with a final question to think about. What are the hidden superpowers, the unique skills, the deep knowledge in your own company, on your team, or, hey, even just in yourself? And maybe more importantly, are those superpowers being used? Are they getting stronger? Or are they just sitting there slowly fading away?